all eyes are now turning to Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, as he has to take it forward and translate the views of the Senate into the bill, which will then be reconciled, hopefully, and then signed off by the President, who knows, before the end of the year. A lot of issues within that. It's had a troubled life so far, but it seems to be going forward. I'd like to get your views on, we're going to be covering another 46 million people in the States with healthcare coverage from existing means over a 10-year period with a 1.2 trillion spending budget. Is this a good thing? Is it good for the pharmaceutical industry in the US? Is it good for the pharmaceutical industry worldwide? And what effect will it actually have on patients? Perhaps I could ask Dr. Post, first of all, to comment on that, please.
Well, as you implied, it's a very complex, multi-dimensional issue. I think in the immediate short term, the fate of the bill, whether in the Senate or the House, is going to be influenced by almost what should be marginal issues which relate to abortion. That will undoubtedly loom large in both sides. That has relatively little to do with healthcare reform, but I think it's going to still be a significant hurdle in advancing this and getting a consensus, particularly for the Democrats. In terms of the more fundamental elements of the bill, yes, I think apart from the fact we should always welcome that everyone has access to healthcare, I think one needs to look at the time frame in which this will occur. As you said, it's a decade, so in that sense, undoubtedly, it will expand market potential. On the other hand, you have to balance that against undoubtedly what I think will be very real pricing pressures in the United States, whether we will go fully to a NICE type situation analogous to the UK, but we're coming back to this when we talk about diagnostics, because I think we're going to see definite changes in the oncology market driven by diagnostics. But I think that, yes, you'll expand the population base, but I think there will be very complex pricing dynamics for products. We're already seeing now in end-stage renal disease the fact that they're capping and bundling both oral and IV products together. That just came out this week. Then you've got the comparative effectiveness dimension, not just within the bill itself, but as part of the stimulus package. And is that going to focus only on pharmaceuticals, or is it going to look at the hideous waste and inefficiency elsewhere in the healthcare system? And of course, you have this other sort of element of, even if you're adding to the rolls, you have in the US, in concert with Western Europe at large, in Japan, the largest cohort of the aged, and that will be covered by Medicare in the United States. So that should nominally be another driver, but at the same time, the bill in its current form is to take $300 to $400 billion off the unit cost of Medicare. So it's very uncertain as to its sort of roundabouts and swings. You can see some upsides for the industry theoretically, but you also see a lot of downsides. But my worry is the fact that we will be moving probably inevitably this very complex equation for any government: infinite demand versus finite resource. Where do you curtail? And the one real omission from the bill is at the core of the debate, in my opinion, which is fee for service drives volume, drives cost, and no one wants to wrestle with that issue with the vast inefficiencies that fragmentation of healthcare is, what I call the ologist problem. You have the gastroenterologist, the cardiologist, the nephrologist, and so forth, and there's no integrated care. And that, I think, is a huge price driver, and it's just not been addressed in the bill at all.
The bill is designed to save money in the long term, but there's a school of thought that says it's actually going to increase costs over the long term by insuring people with more expensive conditions, while those with less expensive conditions that need treatment won't actually be going into the system. Francesco, do you think it's good for patients?
Yeah, it's difficult to say at this stage, right? I mean, I must say I'm on the optimistic side concerning the general view on the reform, but it's really that the granularity that Dr. Post has put to the table, it's really very important to think on. At this stage, I think that the drivers are the right ones. I don't know whether everything has been really approached in the right way. I'm really not positioned to have an educated opinion as Dr. Post has, but certainly for the moment, I would say that I'm optimistic about where we're going with this.
Okay. Jeffrey Kindler at Pfizer it says it's going to cost the industry $80 billion over the 10 years. So that's a big sum, but that's worthwhile, and it's something that we have to do. What do you see? How do you see, Dimitri, the industry can actually benefit? How can the industry take advantage of what's happening at the moment?
Difficult to predict how things can go. In principle, new bills and new government initiatives which effectively support the pharmaceutical industry and the patients receiving treatments, obviously by covering the costs, should be for the benefit of both. Theoretically, should also be for the benefit of the budgets in the future, assuming that the drugs, all the drugs, I shouldn't say only drugs, but also treatments, because some treatments are not based just on drugs, but if treatments improve and the conditions improve, then monies will be saved out of the other spending which is incurred in the health systems. For example, doctors' times and nursing time and operations, etc. So, in principle, I support initiatives which would increase coverage of people. It's difficult to predict how the challenges which maybe these new insurance type initiatives might become a burden on the pharmaceutical industry if they start creating noise about reducing prices. But as long as you don't think about price reduction per se and you think about increasing coverage, I think it's a good thing for everyone.
But I think even with the proposals, even though it was negotiated that the industry with pharma would give up 80 billion, you have to look at the bill that was introduced in the House took that way up, and Waxman in particular was driving that. So I think the last figure I saw was 120 billion, and 40 billion for the device industry and 7 billion for the diagnostics industry. So as Dimitri said, even if those figures were stable, if you're then going to flirt with any suggestion of price erosion. But the other issue, which I think is an interesting one, is that the PDUFA bill, whereby the industry funds the FDA in no large measure, what is going to be the position of the industry when, after surrendering all these give-backs as part of the healthcare reform, then they want more money under PDUFA? I think the next round of PDUFA discussions are going to get a lot more complex.
And the difficult part, obviously, and it all might change when the two bills are reconciled, and in whatever time frame that is. Max, what does the biotech industry in general make of what's happening?
Well, I think obviously it's going to be an important factor for the whole industry going forward, the whole pharma industry, and obviously the biotech industry is absolutely dependent on the success and health of the pharmaceutical industry. It's a symbiotic relationship between the two. So I think increased pricing pressures and costs on the major pharma companies will have an impact in the longer term on the biotech industry. But clearly the risks for biotech companies continue to remain on their development pipelines, and whether they're successful or not. I still think that if a biotech company successfully develops a product, it will deliver significant returns. If it doesn't, it won't, and that's going to still remain the fundamental issue for the biotech industry. That said, I mean, we obviously lived through the earlier healthcare reforms, the Bush reforms. Give you a bit of sort of analysis of what impact that had. It was seen at that stage that broadening the sort of Medicare to cover drugs initially, that helped the industry by both boosting volumes, and also the pricing pressure wasn't probably as significant to compensate. This time round, it looks like from financial analysis I've seen that we're expecting a more significant hit to the industry, actually hurting the bottom line, taking earnings off, but not that dramatically that it will really damage the industry too significantly. A few percent is what I've seen off European pharma EPS in recent analysis. So not draconian in terms of the measures proposed so far.